Today, what we're going to talk about is why doing something really difficult, and especially physically difficult, is a really great way to help us try to find some purpose in our lives, develop some confidence, and pull ourselves out of any sort of rut or sticking point or difficult period in our life. So, oftentimes in our lives, it's really easy to feel like we're lost. And I don't know if you felt the same, where, you're not sure what's going on. You feel this vague sense that maybe you could be doing more or what you're doing isn't quite right. And that also you don't maybe have the confidence to do something more impressive or you wish you could do something more impressive, but you don't feel like you really have that ability. You just kind of feel like you're circling around and not really making any progress or, developing it in any meaningful way. And oftentimes our growth and periods of change don't feel like substantial events or they don't feel like big individual or discrete moments. And oftentimes that makes us feel stuck. It makes us feel weak. And, more difficult is that it makes us feel like maybe we're not the sort of person who has the grit or the resilience that the people we idolize do. We see these people who maybe go out and they're doing great athletic pursuits, or they're working on their personal projects, or they're starting these really interesting and useful businesses. And we look at that person and we go, wow, that person has a certain level of grit or resilience or performance. They're just able to keep pushing through these really difficult moments. And they clearly have some sort of skill set or ability that maybe we don't. And so we need to find a way where we can train that dog inside of us, right? That person that wants to go out and be that sort of resilient and gritty person, be more relentless, be more fearless, and train out the I couldn't do that response or mindset. Because oftentimes that feeling of being weak or being stuck or just feeling like you're not that sort of person who could do a great thing is really mapped to some level of purposelessness. So you don't know, let's say you want to be someone who works really hard and is determined, but you don't have an outlet for that. And I mentioned this before in another episode where it's, you don't want to waste time putting a lot of effort and trying into the wrong thing, right? Because that feels like wasted time. You want to make sure that the effort you're putting in is on something that is going to be like the thing, the project. And I think that's a bit of a misconception and a rabbit hole that we get stuck in. Because learning how to work hard and learning how to be resilient and have that grit and be determined, that's a skill that can be trained. And I think we get conned or fooled into thinking that these people who do great things were always born like that. They always had those qualities. And so when we think about feeling weak or feeling aimless or feeling like we're lost, how can we learn to practice the qualities that allow us to get away from that? How can we learn to, instead of feeling weak, how do we learn to feel strong? How do we learn how to take aim and reach a target? How do we pick a direction and learn to stick with it? And an antidote I want to offer to those feelings is learning how to do something difficult, physically difficult, right? So how do I learn to push through, commit myself, and learn to overcome some sort of self-imposed belief or obstacle about myself? And so we're talking about things that are very difficult and have to take us to a very uncomfortable place to sort of learn as a training ground or a training model for how to overcome some of those feelings we felt before. And so the definition I want us to think about is that it's something physical. And so there are ways of determination and practice that aren't in something physically difficult, but require the same sort of level of effort. But today I want to talk about those physical trials we can put ourselves through. The criteria for something difficult, in my mind, is it should be something where you're pretty certain if I ask you to do it right now, you wouldn't be able to do it, okay? But you think you could do it if you put a substantial amount of effort for about 6 to 12 months. So that's the kind of time box we're sitting under here. And this could be a day, it could be a single event, so a marathon, for instance, or it could be some sort of skill or trick. So it's the difference between running a marathon versus a particular skateboarding trick that might take you a year to learn or something like that. Both of those take a significant amount of effort over a prolonged period of time. They're kind of a little bit different in the sense that one is about how much pain can you take on a given period and how hard can you push yourself. The other is about how resilient and determined can you be at about achieving something that is probably likely very frustrating over a long period of time. That both incorporate that sense that you have to try really, really hard for a long period of time There's a high probability of failure on multiple occasions, and there's always that uncertainty of if you'll get it done or not. Why do I think that doing something physically difficult is a great way to find some direction in your life, learn how to be resilient and get determination and grit, and also teach yourself that you're someone who can overcome their obstacles? The first sort of key benefit is that you really start to learn where your limits are. So I'll use the example of a marathon because that's something that I've done. When you run an event like that, you learn that at a certain point you go, wow, this is really difficult. I'm in a lot of pain. This is really uncomfortable. I'm really sore. I'm cramping. This is really tough. And so you learn where, hang on, I can push all this way, and here it starts to get really uncomfortable. But you also learn in that point, you go, well, I'm not dead yet, and I think I would have to do a lot more before I died. This is really hard, but I'm not in serious trouble yet, right? And so in fact, what happens is your tolerance for how much pain you can take starts to push across. So you go, this is pretty bad, but I can keep going. This is pretty bad, but I can keep going. This is pretty bad, but I can keep going. And maybe before you started training, you were only comfortable with this much discomfort. Once you got to this point, you're like, wow, I'm in a lot of pain. Something at a lower threshold. You go, this sucks. But where that threshold is for how much pain you can tolerate gets pushed up just naturally because you have to, right? You've decided you're going to complete this event, and that forces this evolution in how much discomfort you can withstand. And so you learn very practically, this is how much discomfort I can take. And even cooler than that is you start to be able to kind of project out to like, oh, maybe I could even take a lot more. And so you get to learn very tangibly where your physical limits are. And what that means for the rest of your life is when you enter periods that are really uncomfortable or difficult, let's say you're studying for a difficult degree or you're pushing through a big project at work. When things start to suck and get really difficult, you have a basis of comparison. So you go, this bit at work is really hard at the moment. But at kilometer 35 in the marathon, I felt like this, and that was really painful. Where do these two things compare? And you might go, this bit of work is really difficult locally, but I'll push through, I'll be fine. Because you have this kind of, even though they're in totally different fields and they're totally different events, you have these two rocks where you can anchor your expectations to how much discomfort you can tolerate. And so by doing a particular hard event, even if you never do it again, you have this basis of comparison of which you can start to estimate your tolerance for discomfort in other areas of your life. So in that way, it's almost like a calibration event for where am I right now? If I try a little bit and I lock in or I focus on withstanding discomfort, you learn how much you're able to take. So I think that's a really tangible and great benefit to doing an event like that. And so even there, I want you to think about is if right now, where do you think your physical limits are and how malleable do you think those physical limits are? So if you go, I'm the sort of person who complains a lot or I get tired easily or, physical exercise isn't my thing, how much do you think you could improve that over time if you had to do a serious event? And if you don't think you could change much, then you're sort of the peak candidate for someone I would really recommend doing something that's really quite scary and quite difficult because you need to learn how malleable your limits really are. How much can you change those limits when you start trying? The second sort of key benefit from doing an event like this is that you learn how to try. And this is sort of a strange thing to say. The ability to try hard at things and sort of put your whole being into it and put a lot of effort towards something, repeated, continuous, high levels of effort, that is not an innate ability. And I think we get really stuck in believing that it is. So if we're looking at other people who are really great and go, wow, that person is so determined and resilient and they have this ability to just keep showing up over and over and over again. Wow, I'm not that sort of person. I don't think I could do that. And we think because you couldn't do that, because we've been comparing people who are really great at this skill, or we've been comparing ourselves to people who are really great at that ability to try, we think we suck. Trying is a learned skill. Determination is a learned skill. You can keep showing up and teach yourself how to keep showing up even more. And so I had all these idols, and you might be like me, who just were really great at doing these hard things, showing up over and over and over again. And I thought I sucked. I remember when I was sort of a late teenager, 19, 18, even in sort of my really early 20s, 2021, I thought deep down I was not someone who could try harder things. I just sort of had this innate belief about myself that I was not that guy. But what I learned is, as I sort of kept showing up at these hard events, is that every time I tried, and even if I didn't do that great, the actual outcome of whatever event I was putting effort into didn't really matter, because I always learned that base skill of I can try a little bit more. So in that way, success and effort and suffering through discomfort, they're all skills, and they're all skills that you can practice. And so if you pick a really difficult event, then you're sort of forcing yourself to learn that skill. And it's very practicable. And you'll find that as you commit over 6 months and a year, which is why I picked those time frames, because they're not events where you can just kind of have a go and you either win or lose, but they're events where you have to put in a serious amount of effort over a prolonged period of time. You develop this skill of trying. And I think that's a really great outcome and a really important skill to learn in our life, especially when you find that anything kind of worth having requires you to try over a repeated period of time. Third benefit, or third reason I think these events are really great, is that they put the rest of your life kind of in perspective. And we touched on this a little bit before with our limits, but I really want to highlight the fact that when you boil down whatever a difficult thing is, a lot of it just requires handling discomfort over a prolonged period of time. And you'll find that when you do something physically hard, you get so much carryover to other periods in your life. So at university, for instance, that's a time when any one class or any one assignment isn't actually that hard, but it's the idea of showing up for all your classes, all your assignments, all your tests over and over and over and over and over again, over 5 years or 5.5 years or whatever period your degree is. It's the same thing at work as well, where you might have a project that's not that hard, but the idea of committing to that project day in, day out, 5 days a week for maybe even up to a year or 2 years, that's really quite difficult. And so you can train that ability to keep showing up and handling normal discomfort for unnormal amounts of time by doing these physically hard events. And on another note, what doing hard events do in your life that might be full of other really difficult, prolonged challenges is things like university, things like work, things like having a family, is they give you another single point of focus in your life that can help you align your individual values or what you care about. So oftentimes when we're feeling aimless and we don't have things to shoot at or aim for, or we have big goals or ambitions, it's so easy to indulge in behaviors that are objectively bad for us because we don't have a reason to not do them. So you think about, staying up late, drinking, hanging out with people we maybe don't like, binge watching content. These are all things that get exponentially easier to do because we don't have a comparison of what it's taking away from. So for instance, let's say you take a person who doesn't have any big goal in their life and you invite them out to go drinking. It's really easy for that person to say yes, because at least it's something happening in their life. It's some sort of way to get external validation from the world, and maybe it's going to be pretty fun, which counteracts this feeling of maybe purposelessness or aimlessness. A lot of us, I think, if we were being honest with ourselves and you asked objectively, is this an event that you think is, or is this an activity you think is good for you? Is staying up late good for you? Is hanging out with people you don't like good for you? Is getting caught like doom scrolling good for you? A lot of us would say no. But it's so hard to take away from those activities because you don't have something better to be doing. So we'll take another person, someone who has, a marathon coming up. When that person gets asked to stay up late or go out drinking or, get caught doom scrolling on their phone, they're much more likely to be able to limit those events in their life because they know that they've got this event coming up that they do care about. So they don't have the space in their life to actually make bad decisions. And so they have to get more picky about what they're going to sacrifice and what they're willing to allow space for in their life. So oftentimes, motivation and discipline are things that we hold in high regard and we go, oh no, I went out drinking or I stayed up late last night, so I must not be disciplined. But in reality, it's really hard to be disciplined when you have nothing worth being disciplined for. So inputting this external sort of set of control gives you a brief North Star. It gives you a point of focus to help begin to align those values in your life back up. So you have a reason to not indulge in your bad behaviors. And that's not to say that, drinking is inherently bad, or staying up late is inherently bad, or seeing your friends is even bad. Part of being a well-rounded human is making bad decisions that aren't objectively good from time to time, because, that's part of the fun in life. But they have to come in a sort of balance. And it's really easy to lose that balance if you don't have something else aligning what's important to you in your life. Physical struggle, something really difficult, makes you figure out, what am I willing to sacrifice? What's the first vice or bad behavior I would give up to help me achieve this goal? Sort of the final thing that I think helps with doing something really difficult in your life is that it will never make your life worse. So if you're thinking about, I don't know what I want to do, I'm feeling purposeless, I don't feel like I've got a strong aim or a strong goal, how can I figure out how to do those things? If you pick a singularly hard event, like a marathon or an Ironman or going on some sort of adventure, I'm not really sure. It's really a personal thing to you. But if you do that and you know it's hard, the worst case is that you'll have a cool story to tell, right? And you learn that you can try at something for a prolonged period of time. People don't do things because they're too scared of losing, looking stupid, being a beginner again. And what doing something difficult does is it makes you do all of those things again. You will be scared to lose and mess up or fail. If you sign up for a marathon, there's a big chance you're going to blow up and enter a really, really painful state of being. And maybe you'll look quite stupid doing that. Who knows? Maybe all the people saying that you're doing a marathon, they're going, oh, you're not going to be able to make it, man. You're going to mess up. Maybe you're really worried that those people are going to be right. And, maybe you should be. That's a lot of pressure. But at the same time, the humility to accept all of those risks and say, you know what? Yeah, I might mess up. I might look stupid. I don't really know how to do this thing. But I'm going to try and do it anyway. That builds already, being able to say that statement to yourself, so much internal resilience. And now you've got the humility to go, I don't know how to do this. How am I going to figure it out? You're already in this kind of solution-seeking mindset. And so that bit of you that's scared, you're now not hiding it away or pretending it's not there. You're confronting it head on. And I was saying this to someone recently. The person who chooses something really hard to do and quite scary with a high chance of failure, but still does their best to go out there and complete it anyway. I've never run 5K before, but I'm going to try to do this marathon in a year, and I don't know if I can do it. The person who makes that decision, who confronts the possibility of failure head on, has so much more glory than the person who's never even been brave enough to go in and try it themselves. So anyone can point at someone and say, yeah, you're not going to be able to do it, or you're going to fail, or you're going to mess up. There is no glory in doing that. But to still put it on the line, go out there, even if you mess up, the sort of self-belief and self-confidence that doing that provides, it makes you the sort of person who's less afraid of failing. It makes you the sort of person who's willing to try. It makes you the sort of person who will put in continued, dedicated effort over a long period of time, even if there's a chance of failure. All of that is the sort of thing that even after the event's over, you can take those skills that you've built and start to apply it to the rest of your life, okay? So let's say you want to do a marathon, and you do the marathon, and you go, wow, that was really hard, and I found that really difficult. But it didn't kill me. It wasn't so bad. I managed to maybe manage to get it done. You go, wow, it was really hard, and I didn't get a good time, but hey, I finished that thing. So what else in my life can I put this sort of dedication, effort, and apply this same mindset towards? I'm not sure. I think that's a very personal journey. I think that's an introspective journey that you gain from doing these hard events, and everyone reflects on them differently. And I think by doing something like that, though, you gain the ability and the kind of earned wisdom of physical suffering that allows you to start thinking about your life in a more proactive way. So you might finish an event like that and still not know what you want to do with your life, because fair enough, that's a hard question. But you're now tooled with a bit more confidence, better resources, better skills to go and try and figure that out. Because at the worst case now, you're no longer limited by your ability to try hard. You just now need to find the thing that you can try hard at. Before, you had no clue. You were like, why would you aim high if you don't think you can actually achieve anything? Or if all the barriers in your life all the assumptions you've made about what you can and can't do are so hard that there's nothing worth doing in your range. What you've done now is you've pushed that range up. I still don't know what I want to do, but I know that when I find it, I'm the sort of person that can work towards it. That's the sort of mindset that you build by doing really difficult events. The first thing is, don't pick the hardest thing that you can imagine. So go back to the criteria. It's something that you think you probably could do if you did 6 to 12 months of training. So, if you go out and say, I want to go climb Mount Everest, that's a pretty hard one, especially if it's your first nibble at an event like this, right? It's out of reach, and it's so hard that, first of all, the ability to quit is really easy, because who wouldn't blame someone for quitting climbing Everest, right? Yeah, fair enough. I wouldn't want to do that either. But if you pick something that you probably think you can do, then there's going to be that nagging voice when you want to quit that goes, push a little bit more. I think you can do this. If it's too far out of your range, quitting is really easy. And it's like, okay, fair enough. But if it's just there, if it's in this thin band of between possible and not possible, that's going to be the thing that brings out the best inside of you. The second sort of thing here is that you have to commit to whatever you choose. There's no point doing a thing like this if you're not really in it. If you're not going to give it your all, it's probably better if you just don't do it. So let's take that marathon example. If you say, I want to run a marathon, I'm going to do it in 6 months, I pick the event, this is what I'm going to do, and then you don't train for it, and you show up, all that is an exercise in torture. And sure, you're going to learn that you can push through something, but you've learned to push through something without actually improving. So all you've learned is your current base for how much suffering you can take. And sure, there's probably something in that. But remember, the whole benefit of training for 6 months or 12 months is that you learn that where your current limits are, how far you can improve them. And that's so much of the value in doing an event like this is in the training. It's having a goal and really wanting to hit it, and managing the doubt and managing the fear, and also learning how to show up day in, day out for a long period of time. If you don't train for your big event, then you've just shown that you can pay an entry fee and have a go. And if you fail or win, either way, there's nothing to reflect on because you didn't do anything. Whereas the person who trains for 6 months and tries really hard and goes out, blows up, maybe DNFs, they've got so much to reflect on in their process. Hey, what went well? Why did I DNF? What could I have improved? Why didn't I do this? Why was my training like that? Did I give up or did I actually blow up? I don't know. There's so much to reflect on. But you don't get to have that period of self-reflection if you don't put in the hours and hours and hours of training into this event. So if you're not going to commit, think of something else that will allow you to commit. Third thing here is, don't think too much. Don't think about how much it will cost. Don't think how it's going to fit into your life. Don't think about what happens if it goes wrong. These are things that you should consider at some point, but definitely don't think about them at the start. And why I say this is that these events oftentimes are difficult, but they're also quite simple. So you take a marathon. Marathons are hard, but they're not complicated, right? You start the race and you go for a long time, and if you walk the 42 Ks, you'll finish. That's actually very simple. But it's so easy for us to try to add layers of complexity to things because we get confused with difficulty and complexity. If something's difficult, it must be complex. So we add layers and layers of complexity on top of things that actually aren't that complicated. Oh, what gels am I going to take? What are the pro runners doing? What should my split be like? What should my training be like? How many easy runs? Look, these are questions that are worth asking at some point. And the more you get into whatever you've chosen, the more naturally you're going to be curious and want to learn about it. But fundamentally, this is a spiritual sort of life exercise. And the most important thing you can do is to go out and just do it. You don't actually need to know much about running to know that if you're running a little bit every day, you're going to get better at running. And so you need to stick to kind of that 80-20 principle, where what are the most high value activities you can do to get the most reward. And over time, you will figure out, how does it fit into my life, or how much am I willing to spend, or what happens if it goes wrong? Because that's part of the 6-month, 12-month process, is actually learning about how to handle all these different cases. But if you're thinking about those before you even commit, then you're kind of already in the wrong headspace. You need to choose to do this thing before you consider all of those other things. Otherwise, it's going to get really complicated. What if I tell you it is really hard? So if you say, and this is really bad with triathlons and things like Ironmans, is if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. It won't matter how much it costs. It won't matter how it fits into your life. You won't even be considering what happens if it goes wrong, because you won't be worrying about those things. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it. If I have to convince you that it's not too expensive, or it's actually not so bad with work, or you actually can manage it, blah, 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 then you still don't want to do it. If you want to do it, you will. And so you will figure out the rest if you want to. And so that's what I mean. Don't think too much. These aren't cerebral exercises. Go in, start, and work it out over time. That's why having 6 to 12 months is so important, because it gives you the space to really figure out what you're doing. The last sort of advice is to reflect on this process as much as you possibly can. And I would recommend you do this at a few key points. First is the beginning. These physical events are really hard, by definition. But the thing is that you need to have a really good why as to why you want to do this. And this was advice someone gave me before the Ironman, is that you need to know why you want to do this thing, so that when it gets really hard, whether that be in training of like showing up every day, or it gets really boring or monotonous, or whether that be you're going into a really dark place during the event, you need to be able to draw on some strength of to why I'm actually doing this thing in the first place. That is a personal thing for you, and no one can give you that, and everyone has their own kind of why. But you should reflect on that. Why do I want to do this hard thing? Is it to learn that I'm the sort of person that can push through pain? Is it to show myself that I'm not as weak as I thought? Is it to show myself that I can be dedicated to something for a long period of time? You need to find that why and be able to draw on that when things get really difficult. Also reflect on the process halfway through, before the race. You know, how am I feeling after I've done this for a while? Am I learning things? Am I getting better? How do I feel about doing this? Is this even something I like? You know, that's a good one. A lot of people get like, oh, I'm going to start marathon running. You know, marathon running is really hard. And to commit to that for a long time is really difficult. And you might find halfway through that I'm going to finish this event, but I do not care for this at all. And even that is so valuable. You've gone in and learned something about yourself, right? You've picked something from the void, asked like with a good guess that it might be something you enjoy. You've tried it, and then kind of listening to yourself, you've gone, hey, this isn't me at all. And what valuable information that is, right? To go, maybe I could be a marathon runner. Oh, dude, I hate marathons. That is information you could not have learned from sitting on your couch or watching people run marathons from your TV, right? I know that I will never want to be a pro cyclist, because when I was doing triathlon, I hated cycling. In fact, I even just hated triathlon. But I'm so proud that I did an Ironman race, because that's wisdom that you can only learn by doing it for like a year and a half. So reflect on the process. What am I liking? What am I not liking? And then finally, I would really encourage, after you do your event, and whether it goes well or whether it goes bad, reflect on the final performance. How did you think you went? What was good? What was bad? What did you learn about yourself during the event? Because when you put yourself through such physical exhaustion, things will come up about yourself that you never would have known were possible, or even that you knew were just true about yourself. What I want to finish on today is this idea, though, that it doesn't matter if you never do it again, or it doesn't become your thing, or other people don't understand it. The point is that you choose something that you don't think you can do, you improve, and you try to achieve it. And even if you can just teach yourself that cycle, that, hey, I can start at point A, make it to point B, where point B was something I did not think I could do, you've learned so much about yourself in that process. And so now when you're trying to confront other things in your life, you know that just because something is out of reach for you now doesn't mean it's out of reach for you forever. And internalizing that belief is something that is, personally, I believe, so extremely valuable and makes you a much more robust and resilient person. Because what you've done is you've shown yourself that you're capable of doing something you didn't think was possible. And that is just so incredible. And now what you get to do is, once you've learned that, is how can I channel that same effort into something that maybe is more aligned? So if you go and run a marathon, you realize you hate marathon running, but you've learned that you can do difficult things. Well, what are you going to do with that information? Where are you going to put that sense of dedication and relentless purpose and grit? How can you extract that in other bits of your life? You've shown that you can do it, and now you've got to figure out what are you going to do it for. David Goggins talks about this idea of progress without purpose, or that you are the purpose of your life, and that, there's no 5K, there's no 10K, there's no half marathon in life, right? And, maybe that's true. I think you do have to want to show up for yourself just for the sake of it. And I wonder if you agree with that. But to learn how to be that person is quite hard. That's kind of like top level mastery of this idea of enduring discomfort. And discomfort will come whether you want it or not. But what I'm talking about here is almost like a tutorial level for doing these difficult things. So yeah, maybe your end goal in life is never a marathon or a single event. But doing a single event is a microcosm for being the best version of yourself in other parts of your life. It's a tutorial, right? It's how do we solve problems? How do we persevere in difficult moments? You learn, can I rely on myself when times get hard? And so we're creating this simulated environment where we can accept difficulty, where there's a level of safety, there's a safety net, but we can learn, how do I do things when things get really hard? And you take an idea like progress without purpose. You can only do that once you know that you can make progress in the first place. So this whole thing is really an exercise in humility and spirituality, in that you can accept where you are, learn where you want to go, practice getting there. And the actual size of that jump is not important. If you're someone who's maybe really unfit, or you think you're really not good at pushing through pain, it could just be you showing up to your 10K in 6 months and having a go and walking half of it, but still finishing it. Because it's not actually about the size of the achievement that matters. It's the person who's brave enough to face discomfort. And so you do not need to do something amazing to learn how to push through your own internalized barriers. In fact, arguably, in my mind, that is amazing. It's not actually the challenge that makes what you do important. It's how brave you had to be to face the challenge. And so, yes, I think you should learn how to show up for your life just for the sake of it. But that's a hard thing to learn how to do. And we need scaffolding to learn those skills of how to show up and how to try. And I think picking singular, hard events when you don't know what you want to do, or you're feeling aimless, or you're feeling weak, giving yourself a way to practice that and pushing through and committing to it, I think is one of the single best ways you can learn that. So thanks for listening to me. There's a lot in there. And here are some things I want you to think about. Is, where do you think that you're at in your ability to withstand discomfort? Do you think you're someone who can take a lot of pain and push through a lot of obstacles in your life to reach what you want? And if not, is there a way you can practice that? Is there an event you've kind of always wanted to do that it might be the right time to sign up for and commit to? And what does that event look like? Are you someone who's always wanted to run a marathon? Are you someone who's always wanted to do an Ironman? I was those people, and I learned so much in that process. Are you someone who just wants to get out there and do their 5K or do a 10K because it's something that maybe scares you? That's something that you have to reflect on. And as part of that, really think about your why. Are you feeling a bit aimless? Are you feeling like you aren't the sort of person with a lot of resilience or grit? And is that something you want to improve? And if the answer to that last question is yes, then you really should think about if there's an event or a way you can learn to start doing those things. Hope this has been useful for you. Hope there's something to think about in there. And take care.